Travels and Traditions with Burt Wolfe is a classic travel journal, a record of Burt's search for information about our world and how we fit into it. Burt travels to the source of each story, trying to find the connections between our history and what is happening today. What he discovers can improve our lives and our understanding of the world around us. And of course, there's always Burt's slightly irreverent sense of humor.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Oh, my goodness. We're going to need a bigger can. In this program, we'll find out who was the first European to see a cacao bean and discover its use as the money of the Maya. We'll trace chocolate's arrival in Europe, its acceptance by the church, and its reputation as an aphrodisiac. We'll tour the Italian city of Torino, check on the shroud, stop into a 350-year-old chocolate cafe, and drink the local chocolate specialty. We'll also hang out with one of the world's leading authorities on chocolate. In 1502, Columbus set sail on his fourth and final voyage. As usual, he was trying to get to Asia. He believed that the islands of the Caribbean were just off the coast from China and Japan. Poor guy, he never had a clue. On his last voyage, his first landfall was in the Bay Islands, about 30 miles north of Honduras. As his ship sat at anchor, the crew saw an enormous dugout canoe. Columbus's son Ferdinand reported that he saw a ship as long as a Venetian galley, with a cargo of almond-like beans, which the natives valued so highly that when one dropped, they all stooped to pick it up as if a diamond had fallen. It was a Maya trading canoe, about 150 feet long, and carrying a cargo of cacao beans. Columbus was the first European to come into contact with the source of chocolate. The Maya dominated the east coast of Central America from 250 to 900 AD. Their culture, art, and architecture were on a level with that of ancient Greece and Renaissance Italy, and they were great chocolate masters. The Maya had a written language and often wrote about chocolate. In a Maya book, which predates the arrival of the Spanish, there are seated gods holding cacao pods and dishes filled with cacao beans. The text says that cacao is to be offered during the New Year celebration. Cacao pods also appear on carved vessels that were placed in the graves of important members of Maya society. An illustration on an 8th century vase from northern Guatemala shows a Maya king seated on his throne. Below him, a bowl for chocolate drinks. Women poured chocolate from one jar to another, creating a foam. The foam was the most desirable part of the drink. Chocolate drinks played an important part in Maya gatherings and celebrations.
So it was used during negotiations of all sorts among the Maya. The Maya, we have some evidence for this, used it to cement marriage relationships when they were negotiating for a bride, let's say, a major Maya king or ruler or chief or big cheese of some sort or another would throw a feast at which cacao in the form of frothy chocolate was brought out, and they drank this, and that cemented this particular relationship.
The Aztecs picked up the use of chocolate and cacao from the Maya, and they worshipped the god who gave chocolate to the world.
I think the Aztecs had the same approach to chocolate as the Mayas did. It wasn't a drink for ordinary people. It was a drink for the elite, for the, as it became later on in Europe, for the top echelons of society. This included the nobility, the king and his retinue, the palace, the great warriors were allowed to drink chocolate. It was only in a drink, not in solid form. They had some really good reporters there in the way of Spanish priests who told us all about their lives. And we know that among them, chocolate had almost a sanctified aspect to it.
The first person to describe the Americas as the New World was an Italian living in Spain. In 1516, he wrote a book called The New World. It described what was going on in Mexico and the Caribbean and the use of the cacao bean as money. He called their money happy money because they did not pull the earth apart searching for gold and silver the way the Spanish did. Their happy money grew on trees. The Spanish adopted cacao beans as currency to trade with the Maya, but the beans traveled back to Spain for a different purpose. European medical theories of the 15th and 16th century were rather primitive. The natives of the Americas had a much more advanced system based on their extensive knowledge of plants to produce real cures. When word of the New World's pharmacy reached King Philip II of Spain, he sent his royal physician, Francisco Hernandez, to Mexico. And even though cacao was not used by the natives as a medicine, Hernandez included it in his bag of cures. Hernandez, in a letter to the king, pointed out that the cacao bean was nourishing and good, and in hot weather could cure fevers. When pepper was added, it had an agreeable taste, warms the stomach and perfumes the breath. It will combat poisons and alleviate intestinal pains. He also mentioned that it excited the sexual appetite. And very important, the cacao was covered by the king's medical insurance policy, assuming it was not being used to deal with a pre-existing condition. The cacao bean was presented to European royalty in 1544. The Dominican friars, who were among the first and most energetic missionaries in the Americas, took a delegation of Mayan nobles to visit Prince Philip of Spain. Among the gifts they brought were bowls of chocolate. About 120 years later, that would be about 1660, Maria Theresa, daughter of the King of Spain, married Louis XIV, King of France. The new queen loved the chocolate, but the king did not, and so she drank her chocolate in private. Within 10 years, in spite of Louis's opinion, drinking chocolate became popular with the French upper class. As a result, Louis XVI granted a royal monopoly for chocolate. In France, chocolate was tightly controlled by a centralized authority and only available to the aristocracy. In pre-Spanish times, the Mesoamericans poured the chocolate liquid from one jar to another in order to produce the desired foam, a time-consuming process. So in the 1500s, the Spanish colonists introduced the molineo, a wooden utensil that they placed into a pot and twirled between their hands. The French covered the pot with a lid and made a hole in the top for the utensil. It quickly became the preferred way of making chocolate with foam. Chocolate traveled from one royal court to another as a medicine, but it soon became appreciated for its tastes and its stimulating effect. Chocolate had been accepted as a health food, but it still had one more major hurdle to pass before it became fully accepted, and that was ecclesiastical. The church had to decide whether chocolate was a medicine, which you could take any time, or a food which you could not have during periods of fasting. In 1650, the Jesuits prohibited the drinking of chocolate, But not for long. As soon as they realized that students were leaving Jesuit seminaries because they were not allowed to drink chocolate, the anti-chocolate regulations were rescinded.
Once it had been decided by the ecclesiastical authorities that chocolate did not break the fast, in other words, during Lent and times like that, you could take chocolate because it was not considered a food. Once that was done, then the Jesuits went into high gear, and they had a big commercial operation with cacao, growing cacao commercially through much of Latin America, where, you know, the Latin American tropics where the stuff would grow. They drank a lot of it themselves, too. They were big chocolate imbibers. But they definitely shipped a lot of chocolate back and made a lot of money from the New World into the Old World. A big shipment came into the main Spanish port, which was Cadiz in Spain. And it was so heavy, these crates that supposedly contained chocolate, that the porters could barely carry them. And finally, the authorities demanded that they be opened up and this so-called chocolate inspected, and they looked at these huge bars of chocolate which weighed a tremendous amount. It turned out that there was about a finger's width of chocolate on the outside of that coating, solid gold bars. This was smuggling of the first degree, because all gold belonged to the crown, not to the Jesuits or the church or anybody else. So they had been breaking crown law. And the upshot of that was that it was confiscated, the gold was, and they gave the chocolate to the porters.
The Spanish may have been the first to bring chocolate to Europe, but it looks like it was the city of Torino in Italy that became Europe's first chocolate capital. Torino is a major business and cultural center in northwest Italy. In 1861, it became the original capital of Italy. At the center of the city is the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, and inside the cathedral is the Shroud of Turin. It's a linen cloth with the image of a man who appears to have suffered considerable physical trauma that would be in a manner consistent with the crucifixion. The origins of the shroud and its images are the subject of intense debate among scientists, theologians, historians, and researchers. It is popularly believed to be a depiction of Jesus Christ. The idea is highly controversial. Nevertheless, it's an important symbol of religious devotion and a major tourist attraction for the city. And if it's reminding you of the teachings of Christ, it's doing its job. The earliest inhabitants of this neighborhood that we know much about were part of an ancient alpine tribe. However, in 217 BC, Hannibal, along with his elephants, attacked them, and it was game over. When I was doing my research on Hannibal, I came across this picture, which seems to indicate that Hannibal's elephants were rented, which of course makes perfectly good sense. Elephants are not something you want to keep around after your trip. In 28 BC, the Romans built a military camp in the area. You can still see the typical Roman street grid that they laid out over 2,000 years ago. I'm looking for Caesar's restaurant. They have this fantastic salad, and it's here on Via Ludicrous, just to make a right here. The Palatine Towers are among the best preserved Roman remains in northern Italy. Ah, Caesar Augustus. I'm looking for your restaurant. Which way is it? Got it. The ancient entrance to the city, the Porta Palatina, has been preserved in a park. So have the remains of the Roman period theater. The Mercato di Porta Palazzo in the Palazzo del Repubblica is the biggest open market in Europe. Torino is also the city where Italian cinema began. The city's National Museum of Cinema commemorates the history. In 1896, the first public presentation of an Italian film was made here in Torino. It was also the first time you had to pay to see a film. It was a tragedy, not the film, just that you had to pay for it. The streets and buildings in Torino were the locations where Audrey Hepburn played in War and Peace.
Don't you just love dances?
Where Michael Caine drove a Mini Cooper in The Italian Job. And where Marcello Mastroianni and Jacqueline Bisset did whatever they did in The Sunday Woman. All that cultural stuff is fine, but let's not forget that we came to Torino to trace the history of chocolate and the continuing effect of the city on that subject.
All you need is love.
In the cartoon strip Peanuts, Lucy says, "All I need is love, but a little chocolate now and then doesn't hurt." The history of chocolate in Torino goes back for hundreds of years. The first chocolateria, a form of café where hot cocoa drinks were served, opened in Torino in 1687. A chef named Giovanni Antonio Eri was given official permission to serve a creamy chocolate drink. More cafes and shops selling chocolate opened, and Torino became a European center for the production and consumption of chocolate, and it still is. Whenever I want to fully understand the technical aspects of a particular subject, I look for an expert to guide me. My expert on chocolate, not only in Torino, but worldwide, is Gianluca Franzoni. Gianluca is considered to be one of the world's leading experts on chocolate and one of the original founders of the bean-to-bar movement, which is at the forefront of today's chocolate production. He also conducts workshops for cacao growers in Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil.
And actually, I just landed in '93 in this marvelous land that is Venezuela, that is the cradle of cacao. And I discovered an entire palette of different flavors. Well, I decided, yeah, I have to focus on chocolate. This would be my future. That's it.
The present owner of the cafe is Alberto Landi, and his intention is to continue its traditions. Tell me about the history of this place.
Because it was founded in 1763, so we have more than
1763.
Yeah.
Looks
We have
pretty
more.
good.
We have more than 250 years. So.
In 1865, a prominent architect built a new structure and the shop moved in. Today it's known as the Café Al Bicerin.
It is famous for its products, especially because we have the hot chocolate, the liquid chocolate. The bicerin, that is the typical drink of Torino. We have at the basis the coffee, we have a layer of dark chocolate, and then we have at the top the cream. The coffee is hot coffee, the chocolate is very hot, but the cream is cold, not very cold, but cold.
What kind of chocolate you're using inside the bicerin?
Is a blend.
Okay.
Is cooked for several hours in copper pots.
Oh.
Originally, there were 3 different kinds.
It seems so. At the beginning of 18th century, when was created the bicerin, people get used to have 3 different cups. One with the coffee, one with the chocolate, one with the cream, and mixed together.
At one point, the drink became associated with Holy Communion. Having fasted in preparation for the communion, an energy drink was needed upon your departure from the church. The bicerin was the drink of choice. It was also popular during Lent.
The chocolate was not a food, was a drink. So was an escamotage to eat something.
Church let you have a little chocolate.
Yeah, of course.
For hundreds of years, the cafes of Europe were almost exclusively frequented by men. The men would meet in the cafes to drink, to smoke, to talk, to complain about the government. They were not places for respectable women. But the Café Bicerin changed that. It was originally operated by a man, but the management was soon in the hands of the women in the family. Because it was just across the street from a famous church, it was considered an acceptable venue for women. For many years, it was one of the few places in which women could be seen in public and on their own.
People get used to come here to drink chocolate after the Mass. And most of them were women, so it's a tradition that this place is okay for, is friendly for women, and the people, the waiter and the managers are women.
The fact that it was run by women made it an even more suitable place for ladies. The women clientele gave the place a soft and dignified feeling, and it still has that feeling. Na zdrowie.
Enjoy.
Chin chin. That's pretty good. So I'll be here for the next couple of weeks if anybody's looking for me. It's my regular table here. It's a traditional coffee cafe that became a fashionable hangout for talented artists, well-educated intellectuals, and politicians. Apparently, there was actually a time where talented and intelligent people had day-to-day contact with politicians. Far out. That's quite amazing.
Understand the chocolate.
Along with introducing me to the cafe, Gianluca introduced me to a Torino chocolate specialty with a very curious history. During the Napoleonic Wars that took place between 1803 and 1815, the English set up an embargo on the shipping of cacao.
So in Turin, they came up with a solution. I mean, blending, let's say, average cacao from Brazil and Ecuador at that time with so fragrant nut like hazelnut is.
The hazelnuts were easily available, and the result was the invention of the giandiotto. The shape of the candy is based on the hat of a character in a play. Well, that's part one of the story of chocolate and its special history in the Italian city of Torino. We discovered that Columbus's son was the first European to see a cacao bean and discover its role as money for the Maya. We heard about chocolate's arrival in Europe, its acceptance by the church, and its reputation as an aphrodisiac. We toured the Italian city of Torino, checked on the shroud, stopped into a 350-year-old chocolate cafe, and drank the local chocolate specialty. And we hung out with one of the world's leading authorities on chocolate. In part two, we'll visit a hacienda in Venezuela to find out how the finest chocolate beans are being saved from extinction, how they are grown and fermented. We'll follow the beans back to Italy and see how they are selected and processed into chocolate bars. And we'll attend a professional chocolate tasting class in which I will share with you the secrets of how the pros taste chocolate. These folks actually earn a living tasting chocolate. How come I didn't know that when I was busting my bun in law school? Well, nothing's perfect. Anyway, I hope you will join us for part two of the history of chocolate here on Travels and Traditions. I'm Burt Wolf. But wait, there's more. Whenever we edit one of our programs, we always end up with more good material than we can fit in. Interviews, stories, recipes. So we decided to put them on our website, burtwolf.com.